A few elite rangers thought they were just messing with some scarred woman in a dingy bar. Minutes later, they were the ones hanging their heads because their commander was saluting her. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the kind of career-ending, life-altering screw-up that becomes a cautionary tale told to rookies for generations. And it all started with the smell of stale beer and the easy confidence of men who believed they were at the top of the food chain. The place was a hole-in-the-wall joint just a mile outside the main gate of Fort Hood, Texas. It was called the Dust Off, and it lived up to its name. The air was thick with the scent of fried food, cheap whiskey, and the collective sweat of soldiers letting off steam on a Friday night. Pool balls cracked in the background, a jukebox churned out a generic country song, and the low ceiling seemed to hold all the noise and smoke down like a lid on a boiling pot. In a dark corner booth, away from the chaos, sat Maya. To anyone who bothered to look, she was just a woman, maybe early 30s, a black woman, sitting alone, nursing a single bottle of beer with a focus that seemed out of place. She wore a plain gray t-shirt that had seen better days and a pair of worn jeans. Nothing special, except for the scar. It was the first thing you noticed, and the thing you couldn't look away from. A clean, pale line that started just above her right eyebrow, sliced down across her cheekbone, and disappeared just below her jaw. It wasn't a ragged, ugly mark. It was precise, deliberate. It looked less like an accident and more like a signature. It was the kind of scar that had a story, and probably not a happy one. She wasn't drinking like the other patrons. She wasn't there to forget. She was observing. Her eyes, dark and calm, swept the room in a slow, methodical pattern. She clocked the exits, noted the overserved private laughing too loudly at the bar, registered the tension between two sergeants arguing over a game of pool. Her posture was relaxed but ready. Her hands rested on the table, but her fingers weren't still. They tapped out a silent, rhythmic pattern on the damp wood. It was a habit she couldn't break, a way of keeping her mind sharp, her body in a state of quiet readiness. She was a predator at rest, surrounded by gazelles who thought they were lions. That's when they walked in. 3 of them. You could spot them a mile away. The confident swagger, the lean, muscular builds honed by endless training, the identical high and tight haircuts. U.S. Army Rangers. They were the best of the best, and they knew it. They walked into the bar not like guests, but like owners. The crowd parted for them slightly. A few soldiers nodded in respect. They were the kings of this little kingdom. Their leader was a young buck sergeant named Jake. He had a chiseled jaw, a cocky smile, and the kind of easy arrogance that came from being told you were special your whole life. He and his buddies, Miller and Davis, grabbed a table near the center of the room, their laughter loud and abrasive. They were celebrating the end of a brutal training cycle, and they were looking for a way to burn off the adrenaline. It didn't take long for Jake's eyes to land on Maya. He saw what everyone else saw, a lone woman with a scar, but he interpreted it differently. He didn't see strength or history. He saw a victim, an easy target, a diversion for his Friday night. He nudged Miller. "Check that out," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Think she got that in a cat fight?" Miller chuckled, a dumb, eager sound. Or maybe she just pissed off the wrong guy. Jake's smile widened. He liked a challenge, or at least what he perceived as a challenge. He stood up, grabbing 2 fresh beers from the bar. "Watch this," he said to his friends. "Gonna go extend a welcome to the local scenery." He sauntered over to Maya's booth, his movements loose and overly confident. He slid into the seat opposite her without an invitation, placing one of the beers on her table. "Looks like you could use a refill," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. Maya didn't flinch. She slowly lifted her gaze from her bottle and met his eyes. Her expression was completely neutral. No fear, no anger, no interest. It was like looking at a granite wall. The silence stretched. It was only a few seconds, but in the loud bar, it felt like an eternity. Jake's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to being ignored. "What's the matter?" He pushed, leaning forward slightly. "Cat got your tongue? Or did it just get your face?" He gestured vaguely toward her scar. It was a clumsy, cruel line, meant to provoke. Still nothing. Maya just held his gaze. Her dark eyes were unreadable. It was unnerving. She wasn't reacting the way people were supposed to react. There was no flicker of hurt, no flash of anger. There was only a deep, unsettling calm. It was the calm of a bomb technician looking at a live device. She was analyzing him, categorizing him, and he could feel it. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. His buddies were watching, snickering. He felt his authority being challenged by her silence. "You know," he said, his voice losing its smooth edge and gaining a harder, more aggressive tone. "It's rude not to answer when someone's talking to you, especially when that someone is an Army Ranger." He puffed his chest out slightly, a classic alpha male display. He was reminding her of his status, of his power in this world. He wanted to see her shrink. He wanted to see a flicker of fear. But Maya didn't shrink. She didn't even blink. She simply took a slow, deliberate sip of her beer, then placed the bottle back on the table with a soft click. The sound was barely audible, but in the space between them, it was a gunshot. She then gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a dismissal, a clear, silent message. "You are not worth my time." For Jake, a man whose entire identity was built on respect and dominance, this was a declaration of war. His face flushed. The friendly, predatory charm vanished, replaced by a raw, ugly anger. He had come over here for a bit of fun, to show off for his friends. But now it was personal. He was going to make her acknowledge him. He was going to make her show him respect. He just had no idea how badly he had miscalculated the situation. He thought he was the predator. In reality, he had just wandered into the den of a sleeping tiger, and he was about to poke it with a stick. Jake's anger was a physical thing. You could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped his beer bottle. Maya's silence wasn't just a rejection. To him, it was an insult to his uniform, to his very existence as a ranger. The whole bar wasn't watching, but his two buddies were, and in his world, that was the whole world. He couldn't back down now. He had to escalate. "So you think you're tough, huh?" he sneered, his voice loud enough now to draw a few curious glances from nearby tables. "Sitting over here with your battle-scarred face, acting like you're better than everyone. You're in a military town, sweetheart. That uniform," he jabbed a thumb at his own chest, "means something here. It means you show some damn respect." Maya's expression remained unchanged, but inside, a switch had flipped. She was no longer just observing. She was recording. Every word, every gesture, every shift in his tone was being filed away. Her heart rate didn't increase. Her breathing remained slow and even. This was familiar territory for her. The controlled escalation of a hostile subject. She had seen it 100 times before in mud-caked villages and dusty interrogation rooms. To see it here in a Texas bar was almost boring, but it was a threat nonetheless, and threats had to be managed. Jake took her continued silence as defiance. His anger coiled tighter. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he snapped. He reached across the table, his movements fast and aggressive, and grabbed her arm just above the elbow. His grip was hard, meant to intimidate, meant to hurt. That was his second mistake, a critical one. The moment his fingers closed around her bicep, he felt something he didn't expect. It wasn't the soft arm of a civilian woman. It was like grabbing a steel cable. The muscle underneath her skin was dense, coiled, and absolutely solid. For a split second, a flicker of surprise, of confusion, crossed his face. But his ego was too big, his anger too hot. He ignored it. Maya didn't try to pull away. She didn't struggle. She simply let her eyes drift down to where his hand was gripping her arm, then slowly back up to his face. And for the first time, her expression changed. The neutrality was gone. It was replaced by something cold. It was a look that said, "You have 5 seconds to let go before I break your hand." But Jake was too far gone to read the warning. All he saw was a woman who still refused to bend. "What's the matter?" he taunted, his face inches from hers now. "Gonna cry? Gonna scream? There's no one here who's gonna help you. We're the good guys, remember." He was playing to his audience, to Miller and Davis, who were now laughing and egging him on. The scene was turning ugly. A few other soldiers at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably, but nobody intervened. These were Rangers. You didn't get in their way. And then, Jake made his final, irreversible error. He decided to turn the humiliation public. With his other hand, He picked up his beer, and with a theatrical, "Oops," he tilted it, letting the cold, amber liquid cascade all over Maya's lap and chest. The beer soaked through her thin t-shirt, clinging to her skin. It was a deliberate, demeaning act, a final assertion of dominance. He and his friends roared with laughter. The laughter echoed in the sudden quiet that had fallen over their corner of the bar. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Jake stood back, a triumphant smirk on his face, expecting to see her finally break. He wanted tears. He wanted anger. He wanted a reaction. He got one, but it wasn't the one he was expecting. Maya didn't even look down at her soaked shirt. She didn't move to wipe away the beer. She just stayed perfectly still for a long moment, the liquid dripping from her shirt onto the worn vinyl of the booth. Then very slowly she stood up. Her movements were fluid, economical, and utterly devoid of panic. There was a grace to it, a lethal efficiency that was completely at odds with her simple civilian clothes. She wasn't a victim getting to her feet. She was a weapon being unsheathed. She stood there, facing him, dripping beer onto the floor. She wasn't much shorter than him, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. The cold look in her eyes had intensified. It was no longer a warning. It was a promise. The air crackled with a tension so thick you could taste it. Jake's laughter died in his throat. His smirk wavered. The animal part of his brain, the part that had kept soldiers alive for millennia, was screaming at him. Danger. Apex predator. Run. But his pride held him in place. He had started this. He had to finish it. He had no idea that for him, it was already over. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. The jukebox might as well have been on the moon. Every eye in their section was locked on the standoff between the dripping woman and the arrogant ranger. Jake, feeling the weight of those eyes, felt his bravado returning like a tide. He couldn't let a woman, a civilian, make him look weak. He took a half step forward, puffing out his chest. "See," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now you're standing. Now you're paying attention." That's all it took. Maya didn't say a word. Her hands, which had been at her sides, slowly began to clench into fists. It was a small movement, but it was electric. Her knuckles were white. Her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, squaring up, her weight settling onto the balls of her feet. It was a fighter's stance. Anyone with even a week of basic training could see it. Jake saw it, and for the first time, a genuine seed of doubt began to sprout in his mind. This wasn't the posture of a scared victim. He was about to say something else, something to regain control, to push her back down with words. But he never got the chance. The heavy front door of the dust off slammed open, hitting the wall with a crack that made everyone jump. The sudden noise was a shock to the system, breaking the tense silence. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright lights of the parking lot, was a man in a crisp army uniform. He was tall, lean, with the sharp, weathered face of a career soldier. On his collar, the silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel glinted. A wave of recognition and panic washed over the soldiers in the room. They knew who he was. Commander Evans, the commanding officer of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. A man known for his iron will, his tactical genius, and his absolute intolerance for bullshit. And he looked furious. His eyes scanned the room with a laser-like intensity, ignoring the saluting soldiers and the stunned silence. He was looking for someone. His gaze swept past the bar, over the pool tables, and then it locked onto the scene in the corner. He saw his 3 men. He saw Jake, standing in a posture of aggression, and he saw the woman, soaked in beer, standing opposite him. Commander Evans' face, already grim, hardened into a mask of cold fury. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just started walking. His steps were measured, deliberate, each footfall on the worn wooden floor sounding like a hammer blow. The crowd of soldiers parted for him like the Red Sea. Miller and Davis, Jake's buddies, looked like they'd seen a ghost. Their faces went pale, and they seemed to shrink into their seats. Jake froze. All the fight, all the arrogance drained out of him in a single, heart-stopping moment. Seeing your battalion commander outside the wire is one thing. Seeing him walk into a bar, looking like he's about to kill someone, right when you're in the middle of harassing a civilian, it's the kind of nightmare scenario soldiers joke about. But But this was real. Evans didn't even look at Jake. He walked right past him, his eyes fixed on Maya. He stopped directly in front of her, maybe a foot away. The entire bar was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the beer coolers. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. They expected him to yell at her, to ask what was going on. They expected him to defend his men. What happened next? Nobody could have predicted. Commander Evans, a battle-hardened ranger officer, a man who commanded hundreds of the world's most elite soldiers, looked at the scarred, beer-soaked black woman in front of him. And in one sharp, precise movement, he snapped to the position of attention. His back went ramrod straight, his chin tucked, his hand shot up to his brow in a perfect, crisp, textbook military salute. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Jaws literally dropped. Jake stared, his mouth hanging open, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Miller and Davis looked at each other in pure, unadulterated panic. The salute held. It wasn't a quick gesture. It was a formal, sustained sign of the deepest respect. And then Commander Evans spoke. His voice wasn't a yell, but it cut through the silence with the clarity of a bell. It was sharp, respectful, and filled with an urgency that bordered on deference. "Ma'am." One word. That's all it took. One word that shattered Jake's entire world. One word that flipped the power dynamic of the entire room on its head. He wasn't looking at a victim. He wasn't looking at a civilian. He was looking at someone a Ranger Battalion commander saluted and called ma'am. The blood drained from Jake's face. The floor seemed to fall away beneath his feet. In that single, surreal moment, he finally understood. He hadn't just picked a fight. He had committed treason. Maya held the salute for a second, her expression unreadable, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the only acknowledgement she gave. Evans dropped his hand, but remained at the position of attention. The message was clear. She was in charge. Only then did the commander turn his head, his eyes finding Jake. The look he gave him wasn't just angry. It was a look of pure, weaponized disappointment. It was the look a man gives something he's about to erase from existence. "Sergeant," Evans' voice was dangerously quiet. "What in the ever-loving hell do you think you're doing?" Jake couldn't speak. His throat was dry. Words had deserted him. He just stood there, swaying slightly, looking between his commander and the woman he had just assaulted. Evans didn't wait for an answer. He took a step toward his men, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper that only they could hear. "You absolute, certifiable idiots." He gestured with his head toward Maya. "Do you have any idea at all, who this is?" Miller and Davis were shaking their heads, their eyes wide with terror. "This," Evans hissed, "is Colonel Maya Washington." The name hung in the air. Colonel. The rank alone was enough to make Jake feel sick. But Evans wasn't done. "You've studied her missions at the academy. You've read about her in after-action reports. This is the woman they call Ghost. The one who held the line in Kandahar when her entire team was down. The one who walked 30 miles through hostile territory with intel that saved an entire platoon." He took another step, getting right in Jake's face. "The scar you were making fun of? She got that pulling her wounded radio operator out of a burning Humvee while under enemy fire. It earned her a silver star. What has your face earned you, Sergeant?" Jake finally found his voice. It was a choked, pathetic whisper. "Sir, don't you sir me," Evans snapped. He pointed a trembling finger at Jake. "Her real mission isn't in some godforsaken desert. It's here. She is personally conducting a readiness and culture assessment of this battalion for SOCOM, for Special Operations Command. She was here to see if you're worthy of the title you wear. And you," he spat the word, "have just given her a year's worth of data in one night." The finality in his commander's voice was absolute. Jake felt his knees go weak. It was over. His career, his reputation, his life as he knew it. It had all just ended in a cheap, dirty bar. The fallout was swift and brutal. Jake and his two friends weren't just disciplined. They were erased. An Article 15, a reduction in rank. And within a week, they were processed out of the Army with a less than honorable discharge. Their Ranger tabs, once a source of immense pride, were now just a reminder of their monumental failure. Commander Evans made sure their story became a mandatory lesson at the battalion on the true meaning of honor and respect. The incident sent a shockwave through the base. Weeks later, Evans found Colonel Washington finishing her final report in a temporary office on base. He stood at the doorway, hesitant. "Ma'am," he said, "I just wanted to apologize again for the conduct of my men." Maya looked up from her laptop. She didn't smile, but her eyes were no longer cold. She touched the scar on her cheek, a gesture he now understood was one of reflection, not pain. "This scar reminds me how brutal a fight can be, Commander," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But sometimes the hardest fight isn't against an enemy with a gun. It's teaching a soldier what his uniform actually stands for." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the soldiers training in the Texas heat. The real battle is for respect. It's a battle you never stop fighting. What do you think true strength is? Is it the power to dominate others, or the discipline to control yourself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 最终强制性验证